huge infrastructure issues. In some villages in New Zealand, you have 20 times the number of visitors than the local population. How is the water, sewage, road infrastructure supposed to cope with this? The fourth archetype is damage to nature. So you've all heard about coral reefs, islands, natural sites that are getting degraded by overvisitation. And so the very thing that is making the tourists come might not be here 10, 20 years from now, or 5 years from now for that matter. And then you have a few places that are just cultural heritage crumbling. There are parts of the Chinese wall that is crumbling. The Machu Picchu has set to now a limit of 2,500 visitors per day, but it's still struggling coping with the 2,500 visitors per day. So we had a framework and we were quite happy with that. But of course, we felt we needed data and KPIs. That's what we like to do in our job. We like to have KPIs on everything. So I thought, okay, we need to figure out some KPIs for each of these archetypes. And so what we did is we built a tool, which is basically an easy self-diagnosis tool with readily available data. You don't need to start running your own survey. It's publicly available information, and you can quickly figure out as a destination where you stand. Are you at risk of overcrowding? Are you far? What kind of metrics do you need to measure? These metrics are not perfect because we use what was here, but it gives a first step for that conversation, a bit of a data-driven way. So I'm sure for those of you who have kids, first thing you do when your kid is sick is, rather than calling the doctor, you ask Google. I do that with my kids. I don't know if that's the right thing to do. This is the Google very quick answer to what is your overcrowding issue. And so what we did, because we love data so much, we also love fancy cool charts. So we thought we'll put that data in very cool spider charts to really get a sense of what the challenge is. So I'll try to take you around the circle. But what we did for 68 cities globally is we looked at what is their overall tourism context in terms of how big is tourism in their economy, how fast are arrivals growing. In terms of alienating local residents, we looked at the density of tourism and the tourism intensity. Now I'll go through those metrics in a minute. We looked at the tourist experience, how good or bad were the reviews on TripAdvisor of the main sites. For the infrastructure, we looked at seasonality and the concentration of attraction in one place. We also looked at pollution, and we looked at how big are historical sites in the overall mix of the destination. So is this a varied destination in terms of experience, or is it overly focused on historical sites? And so for each of those KPIs, across the 68 cities, we try to figure out, are you a top 20%? Or are you a bottom 20%? Are you a first quartile or a bottom quartile? And so the way to read this chart is the more color you have and the more dark blue you are, the sort of bigger the potential challenge, because it means you top quartile. So now, what kind of metrics did we use? I won't bore you with all the numbers, but I think there's a few interesting ones that are worth calling out. So of course we looked at the tourism share in GDP and employment, and you see here what kind of numbers for the 68 cities are top quintile versus fifth quintile, right? So what is the top 20% number versus the bottom 20% number? We looked at how fast tourism arrivals are growing. We also looked at number of visitors per square kilometer, and that was a fun one, because how do you define the area of a tourism destination? In some cases, you have destinations where everyone is packed within the old city behind tiny walls, the size of a shoe, yeah? And in other cities, they spread across the entire city. So it's a bit difficult to compare. So we actually looked specifically at the number of arrivals divided by the square kilometer that are within the top 20 attractions on TripAdvisor. If you take the top 20 attractions on TripAdvisor, you look where they are on the map, that gives gives you an area. It was actually the idea of a very smart colleague of mine who's in the room today, so it's a really interesting one. And if you look at the numbers, it's actually quite mind-blowing. So the top 20% destinations on that metric have almost 1 million persons per square kilometer of that area every year. This is not a small number. No wonder that people who live here feel a little bit sort of overcrowded. And if you're the 5th quintile, it's actually less than 75,000 people. So it's such a massive variance, even within the 68 most visited cities in the world. The variance you see is huge, which goes back to this notion that it's not a one-size-fits-all, and it's important to use data to really figure out where you stand in this equation. We also, of course, looked at number of visitors per resident, right? Some cities have more than 5 times the number of visitors over a year than the residents, not even taking into account seasonality issues. We looked at poor and terrible reviews of top attractions in TripAdvisors. We looked at seasonality. Another one I really liked was to look at the share of reviews that are concentrated in the top 5 attractions of a place. So if you go on TripAdvisor, thank TripAdvisor for all this data. It's like a wealth of things to explore. You can spend the whole day doing that. But if you take the top 5 attractions and look how many reviews do they have over all the attractions that are on TripAdvisor in that city, the top quintile has more than 36%. Some destinations had 80% of reviews concentrated in just 5 attractions. And these are not cities that have 3 things to visit. Yeah, they're like the 68 most visited cities in the world. So I thought that was also fairly mind-blowing. And we looked at pollution and at the share of historical sites. So now, then we created cool charts, because as I said, we love doing cool charts. This is who thinks that the chart on this site is Barcelona. Raise your hand. Who thinks that this is New York? So roughly half-half. So this one is Barcelona, and this one is New York. I think what's interesting when you look at those is Barcelona, you clearly see a fuller map than the one from New York. I think you also see a couple of challenges around seasonality, the density of tourism. So this notion that all the tourists are packed within a very small area of the city. The concentration of attraction. And so then it's not surprising to hear that some of the residents are not very happy with the situation. In New York, on the other hand, what you see is actually fairly light chart, but very high density of tourism. And so while I don't think New York necessarily sees itself as a place that has huge over-tourism issues the way that Barcelona sees itself that way, it could be interesting for the city of New York seeing this to say, hey, maybe we should start running a survey with our residents every year to figure out how they feel about this tourism issue. Because the big thing with over-tourism is you want to address it before it's there. Once it's there, it's a bit too late. So you want to keep a pulse of your citizens and how they feel towards tourism. One example that's not here but quite interesting is Chongqing in China, which I don't think I pronounced quite well. So I actually didn't even know this place existed until I did this report. But it's actually much more busy than the Barcelona chart. So it's first quintile in almost every dimension of this chart. And so this is where this diagnostic becomes interesting, because it really helps you put a fact base behind some beliefs, impressions, issues, etc. So we thought, okay, it's nice to give you sort of the Google answer to self-diagnosis and quick facts, but we should also tell you what kind of remedies you should use. And so we tried to put together a bit of a toolkit of the kind of things that destinations can consider, depending on the archetype under which you fall. There's a lot more in the report than what I'll share now. I'll just share a couple of examples. But I want to make sure that we leave you with a bit of a toolkit of things that you want to consider. And data is number one for sure. Maybe partially because we're consultants, we don't love data so much, but without having the right data, it's hard to know what the issue is. So there are some interesting examples in New Zealand. Since late 2015, they run actually every quarter a survey with residents to figure out their sentiment towards tourism. And so 90% of New Zealanders actually support tourism and think it's a good thing for the country. But what you also see is an increasing percentage of the ones who think that international visitors put too much pressure on the country. And that number in less than 6 months went from 18% of people surveyed to 36%. So if you're not having those tools in place to communicate with your communities and get their feedback, you're not going to find out those things and how quickly they can evolve. So here there's about we have 5 different solutions that I wanted to talk about today. There's a lot more in the report. Definitely encourage you to read the report. But maybe just starting with a few ideas. So, spreading visitors. There are some tactics that can be used around balancing seasonalities or helping spread visitors over a bigger geographical coverage, whether at a country level or at a city level. And Gloria mentioned a few examples. Here are some of the examples I like. So Venice. I've actually been going to Venice every 2 years since I'm 10 years old. So I've been going there really a lot. In my family, we don't celebrate Christmas, but we celebrate the Venice Biennale. So that for sure will always go to the Venice Biennale. And for everyone who's been to Venice, the triangle between San Marco, Rialto, and Accademia, it's not maybe exactly the romantic idea you've had of going to Venice. It can be a little bit, can be more overwhelming than actually going around the corridors of the ITB here. It's a fairly intense experience. And so that's why I love this tourism initiative. It's a marketing push that is going on social media, magazines, that is trying to encourage people to see other sides of Venice. It's actually quite big and there's plenty of things to see. And I think if you see those pictures of Venice and put up, it's not necessarily the pictures you have of Venice. It's not the picture that we saw in the previous presentation either. It's a different side of Venice. And they've also trained concierges and tour operators in what they call the detourism itinerary, and have magazines published every month. Another example which is interesting is using data and technology. Amsterdam is a bit at the forefront of experimenting with data and technology, is now trying to nudge visitor behavior by experimenting with publishing on their website the live queue times at the main attractions. So you know, okay, I'm not going to go right now because it's a 2.5-hour queue. I'll try to go later when there's a little bit less people. They also want to try to create an app that will send push notification to users to warn them, hey, you seem to be heading in that direction, just not the direction you want to be heading into right now. So with data and technology and mobile phones, there's lots we can do in terms of channeling people beyond just marketing, but real time. The bottom example is the North Island Initiative, which was all about promoting this beautiful route, which is called the North Coast 500 route, and encouraging visitors to go along that route and explore it, rather than going to some of the main sites. There's lots that we can do in terms of pricing. So we saw lots of destinations playing with pricing to balance better supply and demand, whether through taxes and fees, and Bhutan is a well-known example there that I won't go into details on, but there's also price segmentation, dynamic real-time pricing, or just charging people what this is really costing you. So some of the examples that I like is the Eiffel Tower is now financing a €300 million renovation by increasing its ticket price by 50%. And I think a lot of sites shy away from, when they need to do major renovation work and major investments, of charging it onto the visitors. But if you're suffering from sort of overcrowding at that site, it's actually a great opportunity to do that. Another example I like, maybe because I've been living in Dubai for more than 10 years now, is Burj Khalifa. So Burj Khalifa is the tallest tower in the world. And you need to book your ticket on the website, and depending on which floor you go to, and what time of the day, and what time of the year, and the seasonality you have, I don't know how many prices there. But between the cheapest ticket and the most expensive ticket, there's more than 4-time difference, whether you want to go at sunrise, at sunset, etc. You can actually also buy the ticket on site, but it's literally like 10x what you would buy it online. Yeah? So if you're really sort of a lazy, not price-sensitive traveler, you can do it, but it's going to cost you. The context in which Burj Khalifa did it was security reason. This is the tallest tower in the world. They cannot have they cannot have overcrowding, period, for safety reasons. They have to do this. But I think there's lots to learn from that example in terms of how we manage sites and destinations and how we can keep these places open to everyone on all budgets, but just also get the money from the people who are willing to spend more. There are even restaurants in London that have started experimenting with cheaper prices during weekday evenings for the same menu, and so all this real-time discounting I think is going to become a much bigger thing in the coming years. Similar to the Eiffel Tower, the Pantheon in Rome is now considering putting an entrance fee in place to be able to pay for all the maintenance costs that they have from visitors. So lots and lots that can be done in terms of pricing. In terms of regulation, so accommodation supply is a big topic. Obviously, once you don't have hotel rooms anymore, you're not going to get new visitors. That was until home sharing became a very big thing. And so that massively increased the hypothetical supply of hotel rooms that you have in those destinations. So lots and lots of destinations, as we all know, are experimenting with different types of regulations for home sharing, especially the European cities. I think one example that I find more interesting than the European cities is what Maldives is doing. So in the Maldives, obviously, majority of visitors go to these very luxurious hotels. Lots of the value add for the country goes out of the country. And they're trying to use home sharing regulation to encourage visitors to go to less well-known islands and actually stay with locals in home sharing type of arrangements. So it can also be a very effective vehicle for certain destinations to spread the visitors, as opposed to over-concentrate the visitors. So again, that's why we constantly say this is not a one-size-fits-all. It's not that you have a list of things that you can do and that they apply to you in the same way. Limiting access and activities. Increasingly, destinations have had to block access to sites or to certain activities to limit the risk of overcrowding. I'm sure that many of you have heard of this beach in Thailand. If you haven't, it's The Beach. The Beach as in the beach from the movie The Beach. And so because of the movie, all of a sudden everyone wanted to go there. Not only did the island suffer from massive overcrowding and environmental damage to both the mountains and the reef, but also people wanted to do really a lot of really dumb stuff there. So they actually had to close access to the island to visitors altogether. In Galapagos, the islands were placed in the UNESCO's danger list in 2007. The number of visitors had almost quadrupled in 15 years. The number of residents had doubled, super unsustainable. So they issued new regulations to do two things. Cap the total length of stay that you can have in one trip, so you cannot stay more than a certain amount of time. And within that time, you're not allowed to go twice to the same site. So they're also making sure that people are spreading across the Galapagos Islands. In Dubrovnik, they capped the number of visitors per day to 8,000. The mayor has committed to even half that number, and that's in the context we have lots of cruise visitors as well. So the challenge is in how do you enforce that and how do you really monitor it? This is where, again, data and technology comes into play. So they're using all the video surveillance cameras that are in the city to try to monitor the actual number of people that are here. You can also use infrared cameras, basically the same technologies that are being used in museums. You can start using in cities to really monitor the flow of people and prevent people from coming. Then you have some destinations that are banning specific activities. So for example, Amsterdam has banned issuing more licenses to souvenir shops in the city centers. because people also need grocery stores and local community-related stuff that residents need. They don't only need souvenir shops. They've also banned certain sort of bike, drinking activities, etc. So there's a bunch of activities that now you cannot do in the city center of Amsterdam anymore. And so last but not least, funding. How do you make sure that you can fund destinations properly to manage overcrowding situations? The New Zealand example is quite an interesting one, because local governments pay for infrastructure and infrastructure improvements. But when you're a tiny village, you have very few taxpayers. How are you supposed to pay for now the 1 million visitors who come every year in your 10,000 people city? That just doesn't work. You can't pay for the roads, water, sewage, etc. So what the government did is they created an infrastructure fund, pulling in money from the regions that have a bigger taxpayer base. And there's now a fund of $17 million available to finance infrastructure development in smaller areas and smaller municipalities that have a smaller taxpayer base. Iceland in 2012 established the Tourist Site Protection Fund. And that fund is meant to carry out restoration and maintenance work of different tourism-related natural sites. They're also spending money developing new sites for visitors that are currently less visited. And in October 2016, 87% of the population approved those kinds of measures. So it has really strong support from the community. On a completely different note, Rotterdam worked on crowdfunding campaigns. So they wanted to renovate a certain bridge to connect better different parts of the cities, for bicycles and pedestrians and visitors. And so they crowdfunded it under the I Make Rotterdam campaign. And that's how they ended up crowdfunding the renovation of this. It was contributed by residents, but also by tourists. So thinking about how you can finance those measures is fairly critical. So I think these are just a few of the ideas in the toolkits. You'll find way more ideas and facts and data in the report. And it's really just the beginning of the conversation. So we're looking at what others have been doing, we're looking at the data that we can gather, but this is just an early playbook of options at this stage. I think what we really need to take this to scale is destinations need to build a very solid foundation for data and start tracking and measuring some of the things that are important for them. They also need to engage their stakeholders, as we discussed, private sector, public sector, communities, and identify sustainable sources of funding. And so only then can they really create a bit of a long-term plan and horizon to manage and spread their visitors and spread the wealth that come with it. Thank you.